The Gemara in Shabbos tells us, my Chanukah, for what miracle did Chazal set up the holiday of Chanukah? It says the Gemara, because when the Yevonim, when the Greek Syrians entered the Beis HaMikdash, they defiled everything. All the kelim were taken, everything became tamei. When the Hashmonai many years later retook the Beis HaMikdash, they searched, and the only flask of oil that they could find with the chosem, with the seal of the Kohen Gadol, was but a small flask of oil. That flask contained only enough oil to last one night. They lit the menorah from that small bit of oil. It should have lasted one night. Miraculously, it lasted 8 nights. Therefore, later on, Chazal enacted the holiday of Chanukah because of the little bit of oil that lasted far longer than it should have. And that's the Gemara in Shabbos. The Maral on that Gemara asks a very pointed question. The Maral says, we know that's not true. If you read the Alanisim, which is written earlier, written actually by Tanoim, the Alanisim tells us very clearly why we celebrate Chanukah. Because the Yevonim stood upon us. Hashem fought our battles. Hashem fought our wars. Rabim biyad ma'atim, tameim biyad torim. Hashem delivered them into our hands. It wasn't because of the oil, it was because of the war. Hashem delivered our enemy into our hands, and because of that great miracle, we celebrate Chanukah. As the Maral, the Gemara seems to be arguing with what we know to be the historical truth, as well as that which is written by the Tanoim in the Alanisim. The Maral answers that actually both are correct, both the Gemara and the Alanisim. The reality is that the great miracle of Chanukah was the fact that Hashem saved us from the Yevonim, the fact that Hashem fought our battles, waged our wars. However, says the Maral, it wasn't clear, it wasn't obvious. To those living in the time, it looked like the regular course of nature. It looked like kochi v'otzum yodi. It was only once that little flask of oil that couldn't possibly last 8 days lasted, that demonstrated to all the great miracle. Once people saw that miracle, then they extrapolated and they learned back and understood that all of the previous events, the wars themselves, were a miracle. Therefore, says the Maral, both are correct. Of course, the real miracle was the miracle of the war, but no one perceived it, no one understood it. It wasn't clear until the miracle of the oil. If you think about this Maral, it is rather difficult to understand, because from a historical perspective, it's very difficult to imagine that anyone could see those wars as anything but miraculous. This was during the second Beis HaMikdash. During this entire time period, we were not autonomous. We did not have our own government. We did not have a standing army. Antiochus was the leading power of the time. He entered into our cities, into our land, with the most powerful armies imaginable. There was no resistance. There was no hope of winning. If you'd like a mashal to understand the lack of odds of us winning, it would be akin to the following. Imagine that Rav Shmuel Kamenetsky brought the Philadelphia Yeshiva in battle against the U.S. Marine Corps. The Kohanim were the leaders of this battle. A Kohen is a teacher of Torah. A Kohen is a person who serves in the Beis HaMikdash. A Kohen is not a general, nor is he a warrior. All of the people involved were not soldiers. They were rather untrained, tremendously outnumbered, and yet they fought the leading power of the time and they won. How is it possible that anyone could see that as anything but a miracle? And I believe the answer to this Maral really is quite simple, and that is the nature of man. We human beings have a tendency to view things as natural, just that's the way things are. When we get caught up in the details, when we get so caught up in the trees, we fail to see the forest. And to a person living in the times, there were battles, the Jews were brave, they had good breaks, but it was possible actually not to see the Yad Hashem. It wasn't until that little bit of oil changed everyone's perspective that it changed their vision of the wars. And I believe there's an interesting parallel to this very concept in our own time. In 1948, the Middle East population consisted of 650,000 Jews surrounded by approximately 50 million Arabs. On May 15th, one day after the little fledgling state of Israel declared its independence, 5 fully mechanized modern armies attacked. 5 armies which each one alone was far more equipped, far more mobile, and could easily alone destroy this entire little band of Holocaust survivors. Yet not only did we survive that war, we survived war after war until right now the major superpower in the Middle East is Israel. And despite the fact that we existed for 1900 years in exile, and despite the fact that we've now reclaimed our homeland and built it up, the world at large and even many, many Jews view it as just an interesting turn in the events of history. If a person is able to look at that from a clear objective, they see the hand of Hashem. They see miracles of unparalleled proportions. What the Maharal is teaching us is that a human being could look at nature, say it's nothing spectacular, could look at major, major victories of such unimaginable proportions, see miracles, and just say it's the way of the world. And that's in fact what the Maharal tells us. During the time of the Chashmonaim, they saw the oil light. Only when they saw that miracle did they understand the rest of the battles. And this message for us of Chanukah is to understand that what we're living now in is miraculous times, but a person has to train himself to see the miracle in the mundane.